This is the Everything 80s Podcast, Episode 6, The History of the Walkman. Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the Everything 80s Podcast, brought to you by everything80spodcast.com. And today we're looking at the amazing story and the history of the greatest personal device ever, the Walkman. But before we start, make sure if you haven't to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I should be there. Okay, let's get right to it. So I'm going to bet that you're listening to this right now on a phone. You might be listening like on your laptop or a tablet, but if you listen to podcasts and you're a podcast fan, you're probably listening on your phone. And it's weird to think of, another listening device compared to how easy this is to use now and whatever. But we're looking at, probably the original big time portable music device. And the Walkman allowed people to take their entertainment with them on the go. It was the first thing to do this. There was over 385 million of them to be sold, and it would become a staple and identifiable part of the 80s. It really laid the groundwork for future electronics like your phone and iPods and stuff that basically allowed you to listen to your music on the go. So if you're like me, you grew up on cassettes, and I don't know, one of the best presents I ever got was a dual cassette recorder. I don't know if you remember these. The main point was now that you could copy cassettes, and Lord willing, you had one with high-speed dubbing so it could quicken the process. You could always record off of the radio, but with the dual cassette deck, you could now copy over tapes. And, this might have been the first form of music piracy that set the stage for Napster, but whatever. At the time they said it wasn't, I think they actually said this wasn't considered piracy or whatever. But in the meantime, that led us to another great invention from the 80s, the mixtape. But either way, if you remember and use cassettes, you knew at some point you wanted to take your music on the go. Ghetto blasters were out. They were amazing, but they were not the transportable music you hoped for. Plus, if you remember, the big ones had to be hooked up to car batteries if you saw massive ghetto blasters. But Sony would help to solve this problem in 1979 and allowing the 80s to be transformed into the era of the Walkman. So, like I said, this wasn't the first portable listening device, but there were some big differences that separated the Walkman. And it wouldn't be the last, as it would lead to different variations and iterations and then inventions. But the main focus is that it allowed you to travel with your music, and it took that to the absolute next level. It had the ubiquitous yellow design and the headphones that would become synonymous with portable music, the same way like the iPod and the white earbuds would a few decades later. So the thing is, going into the 80s, like, we already had this technology. It took the foresight to create better packaging and ease of use. Same way Steve Jobs did with MP3 players. They already were around and existed, but with the iPod, he perfected the concept, and the concept of the Walkman did the same thing. So that idea, like a magnetic tape player, that's been around since the 60s. And as early as 1963 in the Netherlands, Philips, the company, had created sort of the original version of what is now the Walkman. And its original intent was used to be like for quick playback for secretaries or journalists or stuff like that. So the other, portable music that we had was the transistor radio. That's been around forever too, but the problem is you're limited to what was being played on the radio. But at least you had the option to take, the music with you on the go. So now we're looking at Sony, and obviously an electronics powerhouse, and they've been part of this technology, and they had introduced, the small transistor radio. They were one of the first. Cassette tapes have already been around for a while in the 60s. And even though they were embraced, people still are preferring vinyl. It was seen as, at the time, an invention maybe a little too ahead of its time. Like, it seems like a primitive technology, but in the 60s, it was pretty fascinating. But people still wanted vinyl. And that appeal, though, it led them to cassettes hung around for a while. They didn't just disappear like the Laserdisc did, because they were small, they were compact. They were going to end up like lending themselves better to a car stereo. Obviously, vinyl is not going to work there. Even a bit better than 8-track players, which were bigger and clunkier and stuff. So looking at how the first Walkman got developed, it's, you know, like most inventions, it was a solution to a problem. The co-founder of Sony, named Masuro Ibuka, he would use a Sony product called the TC D5 cassette recorder to be able to listen to music while he traveled. He wanted his music. He didn't want to have to listen to the radio and be told what to listen to. But it was a really bulky, giant chunk of electronic. It wasn't the most conducive thing for carrying around. If you go to the show notes today, that's got the whole, this is where the whole like blog and article is, and there's pictures of all these things I'm referring to, and you can see that by going to everything80spodcast.com/6. And so he wanted and asked the designers, he actually asked one of the deputy presidents to design a smaller device that was only meant for playback. He just wanted to listen to his music on the plane. He had a few other requests. He wanted to have stereo sound because he listened to a lot of classical music, and he wanted to enjoy it better. He wanted to have it private and personal in his own headphones, but he didn't want to scrimp on the sound quality. That was still very important to him. So they come out with the first sort of prototype, and they called it, it was kind of taken from a thing that already existed called the Sony Pressman, which was a mono cassette recorder. But that, you know, that name will obviously pop up again later. But it's kind of, again, like, check this out on the show notes, or if like you're listening on YouTube, the link should be down below, or even if you just like Google Sony Pressman, you'll have a look at this thing. It looks like a big tape recorder, basically what it is. The Walkman then was developed out of this concept of the main goal to be playback. It didn't need to record. It didn't need anything. It was just to play music. So it was finally put together. It was made of a silver and blue metal case, and it was called the TPS L2. And it would be considered the world's first portable stereo. And not just that, like a lower cost portable stereo. So they first released it in Japan on July 1st, 1979, and it sold close to 40,000 yen. At the time, this is around $150. And if you adjust that for inflation, today that's the equivalent of around $500. And that's a lot of money. I had no idea they went for that much at the time. But if you think, when the first new versions of technology come out, they're obviously always expensive. Like when the first CD player came out, they were like $800. Even like when the iPod first came out, it went for around $399. If you adjust that for right now, this year, that's the equivalent of around $518. So, you know, it kind of falls right in line with all that. So now you're giving this thing a name. So that Sony Pressman name kind of hung around for a bit, and it just didn't go away. Sony played around with a few different ideas on what to call this little portable stereo. In Japan, where it was called the TPS L2, it was thought that for launch in America, which would happen in June 1980, it needed a more descriptive name. And the first idea was to call it the Soundabout. And that was actually how it was first introduced. And then they came up with another possible name, and they transitioned it into being called the Stowaway, which is kind of weird. And they actually would use that in the UK primarily, but it obviously presented a bit of a problem. It's hard to market and advertise something that has various names in different countries. Like when the iPod came out, you couldn't call it various versions of that name. Like you needed some continuity throughout the world, and Sony was aware of that too. So they actually had a tough time finding a universal name that wasn't trademarked all over the place. They just had to keep looking, and coming up with uncopyrighted names took them a lot of time, a lot of money, and delayed the launch of the Walkman. So nothing's coming together. They can't license anything. They went back to that original Pressman device. They swapped out the press for walk as a verb, a descriptive way to show what the main use would be for this new device. So they go with Walkman. Honestly, I think the name Soundabout isn't the worst thing in the world. And it's very easily that it could have been called that. But obviously Walkman stuck and it's the perfect name. So now they're marketing the Walkman. And this is, it seems weird that there's a time when the embracement of Japanese culture wasn't as commonplace as it is today. There's, obvious connections over the years. We've embraced so much stuff, like from a pop culture standpoint, like Hello Kitty or Pokemon or, the massive popularity of the growth of sushi in Japanese restaurants for the 80s and stuff. But this is still a relatively new thing in North America to embrace Japanese culture and technology. And the Walkman was seen as one of the first ways to bring some Japaneseness, if that's a word, into not only North America, but global culture. And, we know the best electronics have come from Japan, but this isn't common knowledge in the early 80s. So Sony wants to promote the idea of high technology, but also that concept of miniaturization, shrinking things down from big, giant components into more compact and usable things. Like this didn't look at the original VCRs and everything was just giant. And in Japan, they were making these things more transportable and usable and compact and stuff like that. So the idea with the Walkman is like now you're taking your giant home stereo and you're shrinking it down into something that could fit into your hand. And they really wanted to promote and push this idea through North America and the rest of the world too. So they were also aware at the time when they came up with the name Walkman of the isolation in the name, and that the product was connected with a man. And the early advertisements would actually show to make sure that they would say walk men and walk women, so that it didn't look like it was a specifically marketed product just for men. Another big focus on the advertising was based around personalization and the personalization of this new device that no one's really seen before. And like I just been discussing, there was transistor radios and everyone always used them, but the only way to listen to the music was whatever was limited to the radio stations you could tune into, if you could even tune into them. Sometimes you're completely stuck depending on the frequency or the strength of the signal or whatever, and you just had to listen to their playlist. Like if you like jazz and you could only listen to rock stations, you're kind of screwed, and the transistor radio, it doesn't really work for you. So Sony really focused on this idea that this was a new revolution, as you could now take your own custom music anywhere you went. Whether it's the mixtape you had or you kept multiple cassettes on you, you had a ton of options for your very own music. The other big thing is you could listen privately, and that's obviously a huge selling point to, young punk teens like I wasn't a teen in the early 80s, but for young kids and, their crazy rock music or their brand new hip hop music that parents hated, you could listen to whatever you wanted without fear of either being mocked for wanting to, rock out to Bananarama, or listening to music that your parents probably weren't super crazy about, which, compared to today is extremely, extremely tame stuff. So at the time, this is a kind of revolution in advertising. They're promoting this high technology, this amazing innovation, which seemed incredible to everyone, but at the same time making it seem like it was made for you, that it was geared towards an individual. So not only is this product awesome because you can listen to all the Depeche Mode you want, if you're into Depeche Mode, you probably were in the 80s, it goes back that it's not about the device, it's about the content. And again, technology is amazing. It's incredible, but it's, you don't necessarily love the technology. I don't necessarily love my iPhone, but I love all the music I have on it. I love the podcasts I listen to. I like the apps that I can connect with my friends. I like all the pictures on it. I don't love my TV. I love the shows I can watch on it. You know what I mean? So it was pushing this idea about individualization and the things you like. The device is just the vehicle to deliver the content you love. And that's what Sony really hits upon with the Walkman. It's mass marketing and personal differentiation all at the same time. So really, it kind of, that whole concept comes together sort of organically, but it's really brilliant when you think about it. So again, you can look up the old Sony commercials if you want to see the show notes. I've linked a couple of those very early ones from 1981. So everything80spodcast.com/6, or if you're listening on YouTube, the link's just down below, or if you're on YouTube, just search up Walkman commercials. They're pretty hilarious. But also, again, remember when you're watching this from 1981 or whatever, very innovative at the time. So the Walkman is out. What's the initial response? So not forgetting that the Walkman first debuted in Japan, it was solid there. It was a hit right out of the gate. Sony originally predicted, well, their goal was that they would sell around 5,000 units a month, and they'd be thrilled with that. The first 2 months, they sold 50,000 of them. So it just, with a lot of the sales being based in Japan, but whatever, the concept had hit. The thing is, in the States, the Walkman actually had a very disappointing first few months of sales, but then those advertising campaigns kicked in that I was mentioning about and everything, and then everyone was like, "Oh, I get what this is. This is my music. This is for me. This is, music is the music you like is an extension of lifestyle. So when you really promote, that idea of customization and individualization, that's why the Walkman works. Same thing, obviously, with the iPod and everything like that. But the advertising kicks off. Everything's off, to the races. Everything's going full steam, and then this had a massive impact on the sale of cassette tapes, obviously now because everyone needs more. So by 1983, remember, records are still going strong. In 83, cassettes started to outsell vinyl for the first time ever. And then, this obviously leads into a huge influx of competition from other companies trying to get in on the Walkman craze, like companies like Toshiba and Panasonic. They started to put out their own versions. I don't know if you had, I had a crappy knockoff version. I don't even remember the brand name of it. I bought it in a Zellers. If you live in Canada, you know what that store was. And it was, I have no idea what it was even called. I remember getting a Panasonic one eventually, but the Sony ones were just expensive because they were top of the line. They were the best thing. But then Sony would introduce the iconic yellow Walkman. And this is kind of an interesting story on its own. So Sony had some focus groups that they were looking at for a potential new yellow, what they called sports Walkman, a more active Walkman, for people on the go and whatever, and tapping into the fitness movement and everything like that. So they start these focus groups to see what people are thinking. They would ask men and the women in the focus groups what they thought of the new yellow Walkman, and the initial response was pretty positive. As it just seems sporty. It seemed better than the boring black ones. The silver and blue ones were cool, but there's just something about the yellow that just, I don't know, just shouts out more activity. I don't know. It just seems more movement based. It seems more that it embraces function. I don't know. Something about yellow works. On the way out of the focus groups, they allowed everyone to take a complimentary Walkman. And they just put out tables. They had a bunch of the original black ones. They put all the new yellow ones out. They're like, "Thanks for your time. We appreciate your insights. Take a Walkman." Everybody takes the black one. So they're like, "Wait, why would people do this?" There came the idea that people just wanted to be nice to someone who's being enthusiastic about something. So like the moderator for the focus groups, he's super excited. He's like, "This new yellow Walkman, and it's fun and it's active and whatever." And so, people were getting on board with the yellow Walkman in the focus group because there's just this sort of instinct to go along with someone. Also, it becomes more difficult to speak up against a group. So that's the trouble with these sort of these focus things at the time, that people are, trying to make the guy feel good. And then everyone's like, "Oh, I better make him feel good too. I don't want to be that one person to stand out." So interesting. So Sony wanted to stay with the original color, but in theory, they could have put out like a bright purple one, a bright pink one, and might have gotten the same feedback due to those issues that come with market research. So, just interesting what could have been. What helped propel the yellow sports Walkman, though, again, great advertising campaign and its ability to stand out as a must-have accessory. I think not that advertising's not as effective now, but I think it was more effective in the 80s when I talk about this a lot, where there's limited access to entertainment. There's no internet, there's no streaming services. Everything you see and influenced by is basically because of like 3 networks that only existed at the time. So companies are going to get their commercials in front of you at the time. Now it's so much harder. There's so much more work done into data tracking, and you look at all the crap that goes on with Facebook and trying to hack people's information and stuff. And if you're more like on a conspiracy side, you see this as like, Big Brother and a breach of data. All this stuff is honestly more so they can gear advertising towards people better. And like I run, not to go on too much of a tangent here, but I run some other health coaching websites and blogs and other podcasts. And if I have a Facebook page, if you set up a business page, you can do Facebook targeted ads. And hopefully I'm not going to get corrupted or whatever for sharing this. So like if I want to put out an ad for, say, like a health ebook or whatever, when I go in to and you don't have access to this unless you have like a Facebook business account and the Facebook ads account. If you just have a regular Facebook page, you're not going to see this stuff. When you go in to set up your ad and you put your graphics and your logo and the text and whatever, now what happens is where you target the ad. So like you can get so specific. So it's not only just like I want to target men age 24 to 30. So I can select that. So it's only going to reach those people. But then it goes so much deeper. But besides gender and age and sex, and you can get location. And then anytime you've liked something on Facebook, all that data is put together. So I can target people who I know specifically liked, say, another type of ebook from another author. And I can find all the people that like them, because then they're more likely to maybe want to see mine. And then you can see what restaurants they like or sports. You can target these things down so specifically. So I think when it seems like they're hacking into information and data, it's ultimately, I think, for the purposes of marketing, because it's so hard to get products and stuff in front of people these days because there's so many distractions. Like, where are you going to advertise? Like, if you're listening on YouTube, a lot of those are targeted, or online, and then Amazon ads pop up, and like they call those cookies where they're placed. So, if you search for a product or whatever on Amazon and the next day you see it advertised on your site, and you're like, how in the world? It's just because they can track all this information, and Facebook ads are specifically targeted towards you. And I can direct my ad just to be for this certain amount of people, this super small demographic. I can go into, like, say I want to target people who own Chihuahuas in a certain neighborhood in Cleveland. I can find that specific market, and my ads are just targeted to that place. I don't have to spend my money to have them wasted on someone like who lives in England and who's 80 years old or whatever. Like, it's so direct and whatever. And I apologize if that's just going off, but it's so hard to get your products and your information in front of people and what you're promoting. But if you think back in the 80s, it was so much easier, because if you're watching TV, it really didn't even matter what network you were on. People are going to see your advertisements. And Sony was just so good at creating, again, a culture, and more not about the product, but more about the lifestyle. And again, similar to the iPod. Once you see something in advertising, and then once you start seeing it out on the streets, you start seeing these people run with the yellow Walkman, it starts to really sink in, and it becomes a bit of a desire. If marketing's done the right way, it's a bit of keeping up with the Joneses. They're selling a feeling, they're selling an emotion. I don't know if you watch Mad Men, but it's such a brilliant thing to look at how things are sold. And it's like they're selling, again, not the product. How does that thing make you feel? What's that desire? This is what you're buying a lot of times, whether it's like a bag of chips or a car. You're buying that lifestyle and that feeling. And electronics companies have always been amazing at doing this. It's like it appeals to our inner 5-year-old. We see this new toy and we have to have it. Electronics companies like have, again, a little more difficult now, but they're still doing it, where they would try to create more buzz by making these products more out in the public eye. And again, like if you see these things in action, you're more able to want one. So when they launched like the first e-readers and the first Kindles, even again the iPods, the companies would plant people in subways in major cities like in New York and London and wherever, and have these people just using an e-reader. They're not even maybe technically reading it. They're not that they're actors, but they're just like paid marketers planted to show it in action. And then if you're sitting on the subway and you're reading your normal book and you look up at this person with this super thin thing, you're like, oh, what is that? Or, you know, you create that desire, or you're witnessing this must-have item in real time. Again, Apple's done that probably better than anyone in history. They're, you know, when the iPods are first coming out and they put people in public walking around in very busy areas, whether it's, you know, Piccadilly Circus in England or Times Square, wherever, they're walking around with these earbuds and this little thing, and people are like, what's that? You can't beat that type of advertising, creating that desire. So, you know, now you're out and you're watching someone jog by with that yellow Walkman in their hands and those yellow headphone earbuds thing. The desire, boom, is right there. It's like the shiny pebble. You want it. And the yellow Walkman was something people wanted big time, and it worked because of a few reasons, not just this whole personalization thing, but the sales through the absolute roof, and then the influence on the society. It can't even be understated. If you want to look at one object that defines the 80s, to me it's probably the Walkman, like the same way the iPod would represent, you know, the early 2000s, early, you know, all that sort of thing. Everyone had one or a form of one at some point. It's the perfect combination of portability and privacy. It ran off 2 AA batteries, and it could run for quite a while, as long as you're not doing, you remember how rewinding would like really kill the batteries, so you were more likely to like play through something so you didn't drain the batteries. Do you remember having to switching from one end to the other side on the tape to try and get it at the right spot? Like you might have to stop in the middle of one song on the other end to start at the beginning of one. Yeah, real struggles. Sorry, kids, if you don't know this. In 1986, the word Walkman enters the Oxford English Dictionary. It's, you know, already again becoming synonymous with the culture. And here's something I didn't realize: the Walkmans were still actually being manufactured up until 2010. They were finally discontinued on October 23rd, 2010, but the units that were made were still able to be sold because there was a demand for them in a bunch of countries. That's nuts. I had no idea that. So, and here's the other thing I just wanted to mention on about the influence of the Walkman on culture and how much of an impact it made. Like I said, cassette sales were now beating vinyl because of the Walkman. And this makes total sense now. Like I said, I work in fitness most of my life and spend a lot of time in the gym and whatever. And if you're the same and you like to work out, can you even picture yourself doing it without music? You know, like now you have your phone. If you might even be listening to this in the gym. Like when I work out, I'm usually listening to podcasts myself or doing cardio. So we have our phones, we have our Bluetooth headphones, and you really don't think twice. But the fact the Walkman helped usher in more people to fitness than anything ever before. Like Richard Simmons, Jillian Michaels, like nothing had an impact. And music has now become synonymous with working out, where I don't know if you're the same, but if I've forgotten my headphones, I've just left the gym because I just didn't think I could work out without music. I'm a little better with it now, but when the Walkman first hit, so did that boom in fitness in the 80s. And again, if you grew up in that time, you know that's when like aerobics got bigger and classes and all that thing and things, and gyms opened up everywhere. But the Walkman might have influenced it more because millions who started using the Walkman started to use it to exercise, whether it was running, jogging, walking, training in the gym. You could now listen to what you wanted instead of whatever crap was blaring over the speakers. And like I mentioned, the aerobics thing, the Walkman is seen as creating the aerobics craze. and turned more people on to getting fit. And from 1987 to 1997, which is really the height of the popularity of the Walkman, the number of people who said they started walking for exercise increased by 30%. And that's just walking. That's not more people who had stopped going to the gym now like rejoining it again or joining classes. And the Walkman really, that's how much it influenced culture and other industries. Pretty incredible. So I'll start winding it down there. See, bet you didn't think there's that much on the Walkman, and hopefully it's been a good trip down memory lane if you remember the iconic device, and a lot of interesting information. And it's no doubt cemented itself as part of pop culture. It led the way for the Discman, then the MP3 player, then the iPod, now your phone or your iPhone or your Android or whatever you listen to. So it's funny now, people were very quick to criticize the Walkman. Now there's so much crap. I'm not going to go off on this one. Everyone gets so much crap about their phone and your cell phone usage and how much time you spend on it. And I get it. But people were criticizing the Walkman in the same way that they did with cell phones, saying, oh, it's going to shut kids off from society. It's going to make them too distracted. It's going to shorten their attention span. I don't know. I don't think that happened. Do you? Like, maybe it did. I don't know. I think we should maybe go a little easier on kids today, because the phones that they have or were using that are apparently so damaging are the things that like your grandkids or great grandkids are going to laugh at for seeming primitive. And I'll probably look back on my iPhone in a sense of nostalgia and be like, oh, it was so simple and so not so distracting as all this stuff is today. And it's the same thing with the Walkman. We look back, if you showed a kid, they'll probably laugh at it. It seems hilarious. But, we have that nostalgia with it. And all those same criticisms that happened at the time, they fade away. And we remember it for just the great piece of technology it was. So, okay, let's wrap it up there. That's everything on the Walkman. Again, thanks for listening. If you really like the show, make sure you subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. I should be there. If you're listening on YouTube, you can subscribe there. There's also links to subscribe on iTunes just below, all that sort of stuff. If you really like the show, give it a rating and review. That way more people get to see it, and I appreciate it. Thanks for spending the time with me. I'll see you soon.